Welcome back to the Now Morning Show, and here's hoping that we can look on the bright side following that crime and violence symposium, because this morning we're going to be reflecting on the symposium as we focus on some of the solutions that can help with the issue of viewing crime as a public health concern. And so joining us this morning to talk more about this is the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Dr. Amory Brown. Dr. Brown, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Now.
Good morning, dear. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I'm looking forward to our discussion this morning. Good morning as well to all of your viewers.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Brown, I want to start off first with an overview of the symposium, but I want to take it from the public health aspect. For example, I know that you would have moderated one of the roundtable discussions as it related to that public health concern. And I also want to lean as well on your knowledge and background of the medical field. So in terms of those highlights as it relates to considering public health or violence rather as a public health concern, what were some of the key topics that came forward as a result?
Well, my dear, this symposium has been in formulation for some time, coming out primarily from the Prime Minister's exposure to certain expertise from within our region that has recommended a completely different approach to this issue of violence within our society. The Prime Minister has discussed this with his peers, other heads of government, and at the last CARICOM Head of Government Conference in the Bahamas, a mandate was given to Trinidad and Tobago to convene a regional forum at which this approach can be considered, distilled, and specific decisions can be made. And that's exactly what happened over the last 2 days, Monday and Tuesday of this week. And it really was quite an experience where a range of experts from across CARICOM and outside of CARICOM were brought together with key policymakers, a number of heads of government, a number of key government ministers, including attorneys general, the commissioners of police of several of key jurisdictions, sectoral leaders, and a range of individuals. Stakeholders on this issue were brought into the same space. There was the presentation of evidence, of research, of recommendations. There were panels where these issues were discussed in detail. A declaration has been formulated, which is more on the political level, where heads are expressing this renewed commitment coming out of the symposium. And a plan of action has been drafted and is being finalized even as we speak. So a lot has happened in over the last two days, and the point was made before the symposium. I made the point that this forum is not an end in itself. It's not a cure for crime, but it really is the beginning of a fresh approach, which is exactly what our people across the region have been demanding, and which is what they deserve. So this issue of crime, a public health approach to violent crime, is not a new one, but it's a bit new for us in terms of its application. From the World Health Organization, the CDC, and a range of other bodies that are focused on health have recommended such an approach to treating with seemingly intractable social issues.
Yeah.
This is the
Now, Dr. Brown, as we look at some of those approaches, are you able to tell us, for example, at least two coming out particularly from the roundtable discussion that you had? Because I know, for example, we had representatives from CARICOM. We also had our own Hazel Othello, who was also on that panel as well. So some of these strategies maybe that were discussed that they were looking at, for example, I know mental health was a great concern for many on the panel.
Mental health certainly was a concern. We had Dr. Othello, who has done a lot of work at St. Anne's within the public health system in Trinidad and Tobago. And it was clear the connection between mental health challenges and violent crime were laid bare at this symposium. And this spans the spectrum from childhood issues right up into adulthood. And one of the impactful reality that was shared at this symposium was that a hurt child is a dangerous adult. And we discussed and looked at the ways in which, from an individual and family level, right up to the systemic and national level, we have been contributing to hurt children, which in turn has been leading to violent adults. And this is not just the gun-toting criminals, it's also the disrespect, the road rage, and the general anger that we are seeing in our societies, including right here in Trinidad and Tobago, but not limited to our own country. Right across the region, there's this escalation in tension and violence. So certainly you're right, the mental health component was very specifically addressed, but we also had a focus from Dr. Sinanan on accident and emergency scenarios. And it turns out that there is a sequence, a pattern, a body of evidence and information that passes through our casualty departments, our accident and emergency departments, particularly in the public health system, but also in the private system, that we need to tap into, that our protective services, our police service, or regional CARICOM impact and other bodies need to tap more into, because that's where you get some of the early clues of patterns of violence, and the wounding and the stabbing and the seemingly minor injury in a teenager can present later on as a gunshot wound, and that can progress in months or a few years to a homicide. Right. And therefore, the tracking of trauma, the documenting of trauma, and the case management has to go a lot deeper and integrate our health professionals much more than it has. So it's not just about the police service fighting crime, but about all stakeholders coming together, not just at a symposium. That's where the formula is developed, but coming together on an ongoing basis in a system that actually works to create a safer environment.
Yeah. And Dr. Brown, what I'm also hearing as well is that form of intervention, right? So then is it that we are going to see more interventions taking place when a child is admitted to A&E, for example?
Absolutely so. And this is where the school system is connected to the health system, is connected to the judicial system, and all have to work together. And of course, social services playing a key role. One of the thematic areas that I think really resonated was the issue of restorative justice and the role of mediation in all of this. The way we've approached the treatment of crime in some cases has simply led to the fertilization of more crime. And that's something that the symposium didn't skirt away from. There were some very harsh realities presented, and there was consensus by the leaders to, I would use the word revolutionize how we approach crime and justice and how we approach even education. In the next few weeks, the Prime Minister of Barbados is going to unveil a radical plan to transform her domestic education system in Barbados. I guarantee coming out of this symposium, that is going to cause shockwaves across the region, and I hope we will all benefit from that type of approach. So some of those realities were also presented at the symposium. So
and Dr. Brown, I like that you mentioned the plans of the Barbados Prime Minister, because one of the things I didn't hear coming out from the symposium, of course, was those timelines, for example. And I know the conversation is ongoing, and I know that crime is an issue that we have to keep going back to. But I wanted to bring up an example as it relates to the statement that the heads of government would have agreed on yesterday. And one of the things, or one of the points, was to develop and implement targeted programs and strategies for vulnerable youth at risk of becoming perpetrators and victims of crime. I mean, how soon can we see some of these strategies implemented across the region, even particularly for us here in TNT?
Well, nothing good comes overnight. So a determination on the 17th and 18th of April to develop these very specific strategy to change the reality is not going to occur tomorrow. So what has happened is a number of CARICOM agencies and organs have been tasked with certain responsibilities. There will be clear reporting to the next heads of government forum, which incidentally will be right here in Trinidad and Tobago in July. And I can indicate that by then, all of these pathways and this roadmap will be very clearly itemized, and there will already be areas of implementation to share.
Yeah.
So this is going to be an ongoing conversation with our public here in this country and across the region. And one of the aspects of the declaration that our heads have agreed on is that this is not a one-shot and done deal. The issue of ongoing commitment and urgency, treating with this as a priority, is very much at the top of mind.
One of the items as well, Dr. Brown, on that declaration, and one of our callers brought it up this morning, was the issue of agreeing to ban assault weapons in the region, except, of course, for those who work in the security forces. Now, he wanted some clarification on that as it relates to that banning on the assault weapons. Are you able to clarify what that statement may have meant?
Well, I think it's clear in its English formulation. As it stands now, there is the opportunity, I guess, certainly domestically here, and we've seen it being applied, and I dare say applied in a manner far from ideal, where police services and police commissioners are able to approve the issuance of licenses for the possession and purchase of assault weapons by private citizens. Our heads have said that discretion is no longer going to be made available in our legislative environment. So that's it. That door is being closed. And
right.
You would have seen, I didn't hear the caller, but you would have seen reports of more and more crimes taking place and hits taking place where assault-level ammunition and assault rifles are being used on our streets. So this is not an academic issue for us to have a political discourse. The fact is that such licenses have been issued in the past. The fact is that door is now being closed. Is that the cure for violence? No, it isn't. But it is a key step. We have to identify these loopholes and close them, because loopholes can be abused, and they have been abused. We've seen that.
Yeah. And Dr. Brown, one of the issues as well, or one of the concerns I'm also hearing coming out of it, or maybe did not come out of it, is that issue of cost. I mean, I know the conversation is ongoing, but I mean, do we have an estimate of the kind of budget we may need to be looking at if we actually do consider crime as a public health challenge and decide to deal with it from that aspect?
No, there is no sense of cost at this stage. What there is a clear commitment that first of all, a recognition that this violence, this epidemic of violence, has an unbearable cost in itself, both in terms, obviously, of human life, but also there was analysis of the cost of treatment, the cost of physical rehabilitation, the cost of funeral services, the cost of bereavement leave, the cost of the loss of human capacity, and all the other, the loss of potential, and a recognition that trajectory is taking our region in an unsustainable direction. So no, the plan, as I have said, is in draft and has not yet been finalized, and therefore it is a bit too early to put a cost on this overall approach. It's not going to be cheap, but the fact of the matter is this: we have consensus across the region that this is the road we have to take to change the tide of violence that we have all been suffering from.
Yeah. And Dr. Brown, before you go, can you just shed any more insight in terms of the way forward following this two-day symposium? I know you alerted us to the fact that a meeting is going to happen in July, but anything else we can see coming out of the symposium?
Well, we can't end without talking about the influx of guns into the region. And that was every single head made reference to this thematic area. The fact that we are not manufacturing guns within CARICOM, and yet we have such a high incidence of firearm use, firearm possession, and sometimes even firearm recovery by our police services. So it says something is radically wrong. The responsibility is not just upon ourselves to guard our borders and scan our ports, but there is also a responsibility from the source countries and the source jurisdictions from which these guns have been flowing. And somebodies have been profiting greatly from this exportation of firearms to our region. So a lot of analysis, a lot of pressure, and now specific correspondence have been generated coming out of this symposium to the President of the United States, and I suspect that attention will not just be limited to the U.S., but also evolve to focus on other source jurisdictions as well. That's an important component of all of this, because even as we treat what's happening at home, if that flow continues, and if the source countries, don't join with us, in a stronger fashion to stem that flow of illegal weapons into the Caribbean region, then we know what the outcome will be. And we're seeing it developing as we speak now.
And Dr. Brown, one more question before you go, and I'm leading on your experience here as the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. We are sending that communique to the U.S. What are the expected outcomes when we send that letter?
Well, it certainly gives the Biden administration, it's probably not the best phrase, but maybe it is the best phrase. It gives the Biden administration more ammunition, because there is a domestic debate in the United States as well. And there is a balance that has to be struck between their Bill of Rights, etc., and the responsibility that must rest on these gun manufacturers to control the application of their products. And if their products are designed to protect life, etc., and are being applied to extinguish life systematically in our country, they have some responsibility in that regard. So there is the legal channel, which is being pursued, as you know, with Mexico, with Jamaica, with Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and Barbuda, etc. But there's also the political channel, which our heads have determined and agreed upon, and which is looking at a collaboration more strongly with the White House and the element at that level. So it's multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional, priority action involving all of the key stakeholders.
Nice. And Dr. Brown, we will end it here for now. Let me thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope that you get some much-needed rest after that back-to-back two-day conference. And of course, we will check in with you again just to get an update on what we would have discussed here this morning. So thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you. Well, there's no rest in the immediate future. I'm off in 1 day's time to meet with the Foreign Minister of India in Georgetown. And then we are already deep in the planning cycle for the 50th anniversary of CARICOM commemoration here in Trinidad and Tobago. We will have all of these leaders back here again for the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Chagarama. Very important anniversary for this region. And thank you very much and have a great day.
Have a good one, Dr. Brown. Thank you so much. And that was the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Dr. Amory Brown, just giving us an overview and some of the highlights that would have taken place over the past 2 days for the Crime and Violence Symposium. You're on the Now Morning Show. We're going to take a break and be right back. Stay with us.